course, as you could see from the title, I am going to share my favorite Pink Floyd albums from least favorite to favorite. Now, just because I say least favorite doesn't mean that I dislike that particular album. As a matter of fact, my least favorite Pink Floyd album would probably rank above many other albums that I enjoy of other artists. So, with that being said, that qualifier, we'll start talking about Pink Floyd. Okay, so we'll begin with my least favorite album by Pink Floyd, and that is called A Momentary Lapse of Reason. It was an album that was released in 1987. This was after Roger Waters had left the band, and David Gilmour decided to continue the band with minimal help from Nick Mason. Rick Wright had already also left at that time prior to the album before that, which was the Final Cut. So Momentary Lapse of Reason, essentially I consider it to be a David Gilmour solo album, because basically what it was David Gilmour got a bunch of session musicians together, wrote an album, and slapped the Pink Floyd name on it. It is the first 80s sounding album of Pink Floyd, although it wasn't the first album made in the 80s. That would have been the Final Cut. But this is the first one that has the big 80s bombastic production, the gated drums, the all-star cast of characters, basically a lot of session musicians playing new material that Gilmour wrote for the Pink Floyd album. So I refer to this album basically as A Momentary Lapse of Reason by David Gilmour and Friends. It is kind of what I consider to be Pink Floyd's first AOR album, or adult-oriented rock. And, even down to what I consider to be certain parts of the album sound like soap opera themes. And it's just not something that really appeals to me necessarily. Now, in saying that, nostalgia does keep me coming back to this album. And it is in my top 20 80s albums of all time. It's just not my favorite Floyd album. My favorite songs off the album would be One Slip, I enjoy that one. Yet Another Movie, I enjoy. Signs of Life, which is the opener to the album. And Sorrow, which is the album closing song. The most popular song off this album was Learning to Fly, which is played on the radio a lot, but it's just not one of my favorites. So it's, it comes in at number 15 out of 15 albums. The next one would be The Endless River. This was recorded in 2014. This, again, was without Roger Waters and was essentially David Gilmour and Nick Mason putting together an album from outtakes of the Division Bell using Rick Wright's keyboard material left over. He passed away before the album came out, I think in 2008. But this album is basically just clips. It sounds unfinished. It sounds like they just got a bunch of little clips together from cdnow.com, from Pink Floyd, and threw it together. It sounds very familiar. It sounds like a tribute band album almost. They use a lot of the Pink Floyd sound, but it is Pink Floyd obviously, but it just doesn't sound like Pink Floyd. It just sounds like a tribute album to me. It is better if you listen to it all the way through, I guess, consistently all the way through, than it, as one large piece. But it's still not very cohesive. It still sounds like a bunch of clips that they're using to advertise something for. But it is a bit better than A Momentary Lapse of Reason, because it sounds more like Pink Floyd and all the members are involved besides Waters. Number 13, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which is the first Pink Floyd album, very Syd Barrett dominated. Syd Barrett was the founder of the band. It's a very psychedelic album, at least the first half of the album is. The second half sounds very like English fairy tale folk music or whatever. The production on this is a bit too slick for my taste after listening to Syd Barrett live. Well, I didn't see him live, but listening to live music from Syd Barrett and the Syd Barrett Pink Floyd era. The production that Norman Smith did here was very, I didn't like it at all. It's very slick. This album's very pioneering. It came out same time Sgt. Pepper. As a matter of fact, it was in the same studio as Sgt. Pepper. So it was a pioneering album that you didn't hear a lot of this type of music before 1967. But it's a solid listen, and very rarely do I come back to it. But it's more complete than Endless River and better than Momentary Lapse of Reason as far as I'm concerned. My favorite tracks off this one would be Pow R Tuck H, Interstellar Overdrive, and a song that takes a lot of flack, actually, Roger Waters' first song, Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk. The last half of it, not a big fan of the kind of English fairy tale stuff. Scarecrow, Gnome, and even Bike is kind of, I have to be in the correct mood to listen to that. The next one is number 12. It is Obscured by Clouds. It is a soundtrack album that Pink Floyd recorded in 1972 for the album La Vallée, or The Valley. It has a lot of good songs on it, but no great ones. The production's a little too raw for me. The guitar tone is just tinny. It sounds almost like a drill at times. It's just very, I don't like it. But there's very little to dislike on this album. It's an album full of good songs. It's just there's really no standouts. My favorites on it though are Burning Bridges. Also like Stay, Childhood's End. Mudmen is a good instrumental. I think the weakest ones are something like Absolutely Curtains and When You're In and The Gold That's in the... I don't like that song at all. What's the Deal is a good one as well. So it's got a lot of good songs on it. The next one coming in at number 11 is the More album from the soundtrack of the movie of the same name, More. The first half is great. Got a lot of great songs on it. Some psychedelic classics like Cirrus Minor, Cymbeline. It also has like the Crying Song and Nile Song and Green is the Color. The second half is a lot weaker. It's just a lot of instrumental stuff that's basically sounds like background music for the movie. But it does have one good song called Ibiza Bar or Ibiza Bar. And it sounds much like the cousin to the Nile Song. Sounds very similar to the Nile Song, almost like it's a reprise of it. But, there's not much offered on this album, really, except for the first half. But it's appealing to me. I enjoy it, so it comes in at number 11. And my favorite tracks are Cirrus Minor, Cymbeline, Green is the Color, and Ibiza Bar. I enjoy that one better than the Nile Song, actually. The next album coming in at number 10 is The Final Cut. This is a Roger Waters dominated album. This was the album made right after The Wall, and basically it's a lot of outtakes from The Wall that wasn't, quote, good enough to go on The Wall, according to David Gilmour. But then David Gilmour turns around and does the same thing with Endless River from outtakes of the Division Bell, so can't say much there. This album again is very Waters dominated. It's a lot of Waters talking and rambling, but it does have superior lyrics. The lyrics are some of the best lyrics I've ever heard. It's very weak on actual music, although there are some fantastic Gilmour solos on this album. But it is a very sonic album and very personal album. So, there's that appeal to it as well. My favorite tracks off of this album is probably Possible Past, the Final Cut, the Not Now John, and probably I enjoy Fletcher Memorial Home, and also the Hero's Return. Those are probably my favorites off of this album, but it comes in at number 10. Number nine. Sorry, I had to throw my Beatles reference in there. Number 9 is A Saucer Full of Secrets, the second album, the sophomore effort by Pink Floyd, 1968. It is the only album that actually features every single member of the band. Syd Barrett, Roger, Dave, Rick, and Nick. All of them featured on this album. It is the last album featuring Syd Barrett. It is a very dark experimental psych album. It's a bit patchy, but teamwork, I think, saved the album. There's a lot of songs. Rick Wright wrote a couple of songs. Syd Barrett wrote a couple of songs. Roger wrote some songs. It features David Gilmour's vocals right off the bat on Let There Be More Light. The production is okay on this. The songs are seem more mature than Piper. They seem more fleshed out. There was more experimentation going on here. My favorite songs off this album are Remember a Day. I do like A Saucer Full of Secrets, but I like it better on an album that I'll be talking about later, or that version rather. I also like Seesaw. I also enjoy Jug Band Blues as well. So, this album is a decent album. It's a good, it's a good listen, but it comes in at number 9. Number 8's The Division Bell, 1994. This is the second album made after Roger Waters left. The reason I like it better than A Momentary Lapse of Reason is because it is David Gilmour and Nick and Rick Wright contributed more to this album than they did with A Momentary Lapse of Reason. This is a complete Pink Floyd album, and it sounds more like Pink Floyd than A Momentary Lapse of Reason did. Momentary Lapse of Reason did sound very 80s. It did sound very like a Gilmour-esque solo effort. This does sound like classic Floyd. You can tell from the first song that segues into What Do You Want From Me? Cluster 1 that segues into What Do You Want From Me? Very Floyd. It's loaded with good songs. There's a couple of great songs as well. High Hopes is a great one. What Do You Want From Me, which I've already mentioned. I enjoy Poles Apart. Great stuff. And it's reminiscent of the old Pink Floyd sound without sounding rehashed. It sounds brand new. The production is excellent. There's even a song written by Rick Wright, who hadn't written a song since Dark Side of the Moon. So my favorite tracks off this one, I also love the atmosphere of this album. Favorite tracks off of it would be What Do You Want From Me, Poles Apart. I do like Lost for Words and High Hopes. I also enjoy Great Day for Freedom and a spectacular instrumental called Maroon. It actually won a Grammy, believe it or not, Pink Floyd. Coming in at number 7's Wish You Were Here. And I would almost... I had to put this slightly above the Division Bell, even though I probably listened to Division Bell more. I feel Wish You Were Here is a bit overrated because even though I love Shine On You Crazy Diamond, it's a brilliant song, one of the best songs they ever created. I do feel like the other tracks, Wish You Were Here, Have a Cigar, and Welcome to the Machine are very standard Floyd, very weak, as opposed to what I will be talking about, later, as far as the other albums. I mean, it's basically Have a Cigar, standard blues type of Pink Floyd stuff. Wish You Were Here is very like a drone-based song. Not Wish You Were Here, Welcome to the Machine. Wish You Were Here is kind of their acoustic sing-along, even though it does have a bit of a sadness to it. But, Wish You Were Here is a great album. I just feel like it's a little bit overrated, so that's why it's ranked so low at number 7 when a lot of people rank it number 1 or 2. I think they should have left the Shine On You Crazy Diamond song as one long song on one side instead of bookending the album, breaking it up and bookending the album with it. I think the songs are, in the middle songs again, I think are standard. They're overplayed on the radio a lot. It's not really a tight concept like Animals or The Wall or Dark Side. But I do come back to it for nostalgic purposes. It's a classic Floyd album. It is irresistible to listen to. And so it comes in slightly ahead of The Division Bell. My favorite songs off of it, I like every song off of it, but I would choose probably Shine On, both parts, and Have a Cigar, I suppose. Ummagumma is number 6. This was written in 1979, and it is probably the most experimental album by Floyd ever. It is an incredible live this album was divided into a studio side and a live side, and the live side is absolutely mind-blowing. I love it. It's got some of the classics such as Careful with That Axe, Eugene, Saucer Full of Secrets, which I mentioned earlier, but on this album it is just fantastic. Astronomy Domain, which was on the first album, and also Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, which was also on Saucer Full of Secrets. Superb live stuff. The studio half of the album is very entertaining to me. A lot of people don't like it. They put it down. Ummagumma ranks very low on a lot of people's lists. But to me, I enjoy the studio side of it because it's very experimental. Basically, the guys divided each section into, of the album into solo parts. So you had Rick Wright doing his stuff, Roger doing his stuff, Dave doing his stuff, and Nick doing his stuff. So it's very entertaining to me. It's a very dark album, though. Sometimes it reminds me of like something that would be played on Tales from the Dark Side or something. But my favorite tracks off the live side would be all of them, but if I had to choose one, it would be Careful with That Axe, Eugene. Off the studio stuff, again, I like them all, but I would probably choose David Gilmour's The Narrow Way, parts 1 through 3. The next album, number 5, is Metal. This album is, sometimes it's overrated, sometimes it's underrated. Right off the bat, it's basically divided into one side that has many different songs and one side that has one big long epic song. The first side has a lot of variety. It starts with One of These Days, which sounds like the Doctor Who theme. Then you have it segues into a very pastoral song called Pillow of Winds. And then you have kind of a jaunty little song, and then you have a jazzy little song, and then you have this kind of funny blues tune at the end. But the second side is what really gets me about this album, Echoes. Echoes is a masterpiece. It is 20 some odd minutes long, I think 23 minutes long. But it isn't just 23 minutes of the same thing. This is like going on a journey. This is like a classical piece of music because it just changes so much that it's just an experience. Echoes carries this album to number 5 just on Echoes alone. If Echoes was the only thing on this album, it would be ranked number 5. So number 4, coming in at number 4, Atom Heart Mother, the Cow album. This is the first stirrings of the classic Pink Floyd sound. You can hear it in the Atom Heart Mother suite. It is also the first album Pink Floyd used orchestration. A lot of people consider it to be the first progressive or prog Pink Floyd album. I consider the suite, the Atom Heart Mother suite, which takes up all of side 1, to be a complete masterpiece of music. I love this song. It's divided up into sections again, unlike Echoes. Echoes does change, but this also changes, but it's divided up into sections almost like a piece of classical music. A classical suite would be, and that's what it's called, an Adam Hartmuther suite. So you've got different sections of it. It is absolutely phenomenal, absolutely mind-blowing song. I consider it to be one of my favorite songs ever, and it takes up all of side one. It is a complete masterpiece. The second half is chock full of good songs. Even a great song that I consider, a Fat Old Son by David Gilmour. But the second side is very good. It's got Summer '68, another Rick Wright penned tune. Fat Old Son, David Gilmour. If by Roger Waters, very poignant type of song that Roger Waters, very self-reflective song, very tender. You don't see that a lot with Roger. But my favorite part of it is the Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, which ends the album. This is a sort of musique concrete, as they say. Very experimental type stuff. They even did it live while they actually cooked breakfast. So it's basically uses the roadie Alan Styles is the inspiration, and he made breakfast, and he, he's featured in the song Making Breakfast. And so it's a funny kind of song, but it's also very very interesting, and I enjoy it a lot. I really like it. It's one of my favorite songs. So I think my favorite songs would be Adam Hartmuther's Suite, Fat Old Son, and Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast. Adam Hartmuther is probably the most feel-good Floyd album that exists, which is a complete opposite of number 3, The Wall. Mostly this album is nostalgic for me. It's the first Pink Floyd album I ever heard. I was introduced to it as I was about 14 years old, so you're in that teen angst. And growing up in Generation X, of course I had teen angst. But it was my first introduction to Pink Floyd. It's a double album, but it's full of good tracks. It's full of great tracks. It's a concept album based upon a rock star's life, beginning with the death of his father as a young child, and an overbearing mother, and then a relationship that breaks down with his wife, and the rock star persona coming out, and he turns into this fascistic type of person. And this was based on the Animals tour, where Roger Waters started to crack up based upon all the pressures of touring, and the way the audience went from being very receptive to Floyd, pre-Dark Side, to when they hit it and made it big. He said it was almost like the audience didn't come to listen to music, they just come to party. And so he was very distraught. He was disenchanted, I think, at that time. But this album was very relatable to me personally, and I won't go into that. But it touched me when I first heard it. I listened to it over and over and over. So it's always going to have a special place to me, and it does come in at number 3. Also, one of my favorite songs by Pink Floyd is on the album, and it is one of the greatest songs in rock and roll history, Comfortably Numb, with I consider to be the greatest guitar solo ever, and only Stairway to Heaven even remotely matches it. The reason I give it to Comfortably Numb is because Comfortably Numb is longer. That's it. My favorite tracks on this album: Mother, The Thin Ice, I think Goodbye Blue Sky. I like One of My Turns, Comfortably Numb, Run Like Hell. Yeah, I think that's it. Number 2, Dark Side of the Moon. Well, this album's a classic, obviously. It was on the charts for over 700 weeks. So, almost 15 years this album was on the charts. This is ridiculous. There's not much you can say other than it's a masterpiece. I hate to overuse that word, but that's what it is. I consider it to be the most cohesive album ever made. It's a concept album about life itself. Time, money, death, war, You know, I mean, the beginning of the album and the ending of the album, oh my God, it's incredible. It is just an incredible journey through an exploration of life, unmatched, unparalleled by any other album ever in rock and roll. This album is full of great songs. A lot are played on the radio. It is probably, it's overplayed a lot. Still enjoyable though. I'm sick of Money. The money's on this. The song Money's on this album. I'm sick of that song. But overall, it's a great album. You can even sync it with The Wizard of Oz. Look up Dark Side of the Rainbow. Masterpiece of lyrics, unrivaled. Masterpiece of lyrics. Roger Waters' lyrics, incredible. Atmosphere, the music, everything, it's perfect. It's almost perfect. Almost perfect. If there was a perfect album, this would be it. The only complaint that I would have about Dark Side is that it does feature the same chord progression a lot, but it is a concept album, so I can forgive it for that. Favorite tracks: Breathe, Time, Great Gig, Any Color You Like, Brain Damage Eclipse, pretty much all of them. So comes in at number 2. Number 1. My favorite Pink Floyd album of all time, 1977's Animals. I love this album. Roger Waters wrote this album loosely based upon the book Animal Farm by George Orwell, about human beings. He divides the human race into animals, sheep, dogs, pigs. He breaks it down. The sheep are basically mindless followers. The dogs are the people who do the dirty work, and the pigs are, of course, the ruling class. This album is mostly great songs to masterpiece songs. Every song, there's only 5 songs on it, and 3 of them are masterpieces. It is bookended by Pigs on the Wing, which is a good way to do it, I think. It starts with Hope and ends with Hope. The album's very dark. But the one reason I like it too is it is one of the only Pink Floyd albums that is just the band, no outsiders. Unless you count Snowy White's guitar part on the 8-track. But pretty much that was it. It's just the guys. It's the perfect Pink Floyd album for me because it is the perfect combination of music and lyrics. It is, to me, the greatest Pink Floyd album. My favorite tracks on it are all of them, but if I had to choose, it would be Dogs, Pigs, 3 different ones, and Sheep. So that would just leave Pigs on the Wing, the 2 little bookend songs. Other than that, there's not much more I can gush about on this album, but it is number 1 for a reason. Animals, Pink Floyd. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining me on my Pink Floyd journey, discography, and my favorites ranked. See you next time. Shine on.